Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. A very early history of Omaha lives in a treasure trove of letters penned by Joseph Barker Jr. back to his family in England. Now, much of this extraordinary body of letters can now be read in book form thanks to an effort that began about 7 decades ago. Now, a few of Barker's unique observations were first heard by Nebraskans earlier this year in a documentary produced by NET Television called Omaha's First Families. Now, Barker describes a very young but thriving city in this dramatization from the documentary.
July the 16th. The Leiden railway officials are beginning to buy lots and to build houses, which is another good sign. Heretofore, they've been living at hotels, etc., which always looked suspicious. October the 29th. Last night I attended the firemen's ball at the Capitol. I did not take a lady, as our upper crust would not go. December the 11th. It is wonderful how such a town could turn out such a fine set of people, all evidently so well off and so well bred.
Again, that's from NET Television's Omaha's First Families, produced and directed by Sue Marriott. That's just the beginning. Today, and consider this half of the foursome that transcribed and edited the Barker letters. It's all in a book right now, at least half of it, published by the Douglas County Historical Society as Their Man in Omaha, The Barker Letters, Volume 1. I am really excited about this. The book is a big one. Now, this is just Volume 1, folks, but don't be daunted by it because it's some of the most exciting stuff around. My guests this day are Don Snoddy. He is one of the, more an editor than a transcriber because some of that was done ahead of time. Also Barry Combs, a lot of hard work, wasn't it?
We spent hundreds, possibly thousands of hours so far.
I think thousands is more correct, Barry.
But it was all enjoyable. It was a joy.
Let's talk about who this Barker family was. I mean, we start actually with the patriarch of the clan,
Right.
brought the Barkers over here.
Right, that's Joseph Sr. He was a minister of sorts.
Of sorts.
Depending on what day it was, how much ministry he did, but actually they came to Ohio in 1850 and then emigrated to Omaha in 1856 and invested $25,000 in real estate.
Okay, we've got Joseph Barker Sr. and his wife.
And his wife, Frances, who was not a very healthy woman, and their children, Joseph Jr., George, and their sister, Mary Jane.
All right, so they're here now.
They're here in Omaha. They got here in 1856. They had first, as Don said, settled in Ohio. This was just before the Civil War. It was a time of very hard feelings, abolitionist movement, and Joseph Barker Sr. got very much mixed up in the abolitionist movement and made a lot of enemies in Ohio, and pretty soon Omaha looked like a really good place to settle. They came out here in 1856, as Don says, shortly after Omaha was founded in 1854, and found, what was it, Don, maybe 300 or 400 huts on the Missouri River. Joseph Barker Jr. or Sr. said the prairie had just had a prairie fire, it was all black, but he could see that the earth beneath was wonderfully fertile. So they settled.
Well, he was right about that. It
Right.
was fertile. And a fertile place for growth and for Joseph Barker Jr., who, now as I understand that when the family first came out here, they had some money and they bought some land.
That's correct. they
Which
did.
really tells the story of why the longevity of Joseph Jr. being here.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they not only bought town lots, they were known as the corner Barkers because they would buy corner lots.
Very smart.
Yes, so that no matter which way the town grew, which street developed, they had the corner on the market. And then they also bought farmland. They had 880 acres between 72nd and 90th and Western and Blondo for their farm.
That's incredible, though.
Which was a long way out in the country. At that point, Omaha was not even up to 20th Street.
Really?
So
Yeah.
when you went out to the farm, that was a whole day's trip.
Yes, it was.
You know, I hate driving in traffic from 90th Street downtown. I can't imagine what it would have been like to go check out your property if you ever
Exactly.
did that. But
Oh yeah, he would walk out to the farm if he was feeling really low. He would walk out to the farm to see how things were going and reward himself with some fresh milk and strawberries and cream, and then someone would drive him back to town.
well, ultimately, Dad and Mom the family went back to England.
Yes.
The family went back to England roughly 1860, just before the Civil War broke out. Then during the war, from 1860 to 1865 or 66, the family was there, and there were agents working here in Omaha keeping track of their property more or less. And they were getting reports every once in a while about claim jumpers and what was happening. And so in 1866, they sent Joseph Jr., the oldest son, back as their man in Omaha. And that
Hence
was his
the
job.
title of
Hence
your-
the title of
Right.
the book.
Of the book.
And his job was to not only oversee the property, to lease it, to sell it, to develop it, but also to keep the family informed. And that's the beauty of this collection of letters, because he was writing maybe once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, these magnificent 10 and 12-page letters. They expected him to use every half ounce of postage. He was not to waste any paper. He was not to waste any fraction of an ounce. And he reported then on the social life, on the business life, on the political life, and he did it as an Englishman could. It was wonderful.
Which we'll get into sort of how this Englishman, what he thought of this part of the universe and how it did evolve during his stay. But the letters themselves, I mean, I remember in the war, World War II, I mean, there were a lot of wars, but World War II, you know, they would have this, Victory Mail or whatever, and it was like
V-mail.
parchment, V-mail, and it was parchment thin because, you know, there was so much mail going back and forth and it was costly. And it was a similar situation back then. This was costly.
It cost 24 cents to mail a half ounce from Omaha to England. It took roughly, Don, 3 weeks
3 weeks.
to get there.
Yeah. And they had it timed down pretty well. Joseph knew that if he mailed a letter here on Saturday evening, that he could pick up the letters from England at the post office at the same time, and it would take 13 to 15 days to get home. So if he missed a day, if he didn't get the letter off till Monday, then it was delayed a long, long time.
But he wrote.
But the 24 cents, I should point out, would today be the equivalent of $2.50 to $3.
So you're saying don't complain about the postage.
Exactly.
But he wrote very tightly and small.
Yes, he did.
And which made it a joy, I'm sure, to transcribe. But before we go back to sort of his history, all these letters, very small writing and everything, kind of stayed in the family, and then kind of, I guess nobody kind of thought about him or knew about him or gave it another thought till the late 30s, 1930s.
They were rediscovered in the late 1930s by two brothers from the Martin family. The Martin family was descended through the female line from George Barker, Joseph's younger brother, and they had somehow preserved the letters. They had preserved Joseph's letters in an iron trunk, according to the newspaper report, that was found in the attic. And there were these 200 or 250 letters in just mint condition, wonderfully preserved. And some of them have, some excerpts from some of them have been used now and then, but the book is actually the first publication of the entire collection.
Okay, so and Charles Martin and his wife, to their credit, knew that they had something very special here and wanted it preserved and went about transcribing it as best they could, and pretty much all of them, but not maybe as accurately. He kind of edited them as he went along to put them in, the correct the spelling and things.
These were letters written by a member of his family, and if Joseph Jr. misspelled a word or his English wasn't quite proper, they fixed it up. So part of our job then has been to take it back to its original.
Because this is an historical compilation,
Exactly.
in addition to just fascinating reading. And but it took all this sort of time and to sort of get it into this form. That's like 70 years, give or take. We're talking some time.
Yes.
So I mean, I think it's a fantastic thing. Well, let's go back to Joseph. He's a bachelor. hanging
Yes,
out
he
in
is.
Omaha when he comes back to check up on the land. And probably from the looks of a few things, he considered himself an observer. Not just sense that he wanted to tell his family what was going on and fill every space, but I think he must have enjoyed this
Oh, I think he loved it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
because he took great delight in some things as opposed to just writing down what happened.
Yeah, you're not going to find many other letters written anywhere that are as detailed as Joseph wrote. And in part, I think that's because the whole family had been here once. They knew people, they knew the social life and all this that was going on. And Mom is going to write to him and say, okay, Joseph, what's going on with Mrs. Kellum and the Patricks? And so he writes back and said, well, I'm living with the Kellums. I've been up to the Patricks for dinner. We had turkey and oysters and ice cream and coffee and tea and cake and cookies, and it was served on silver plate. And just wait till you get him going to a New Year's Eve party.
That's really something. So he's here, and what's the city like as he's from the time he starts writing these letters as things
The
progress?
city's rough. It's although Joseph doesn't talk a great deal about crime or anything like that, but it's still very, very young. There are no paved streets. As a matter of fact, one of his first unhappy experiences is the fact that he's going to have to put in board sidewalks on most of the property, and he's going to have to pay for them himself.
Boy, doesn't that sound like today? And they're telling me I've got to fix those sidewalks.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are a few brick buildings, but most of the buildings are frame. A lot of them are just pretty rough sheds. There is a great deal of river traffic coming up the river. The railroad, when Joseph gets here, is just beginning construction, has maybe a year or so under its belt. So the town is booming. It's just full of people coming in from all over the country and from other countries as well. So it's an exciting place to be. It still is pretty rough around the edges.
Well, he came. They sent him back to keep an eye on the property, and there were claim jumpers, and he and other gentlemen, property-owning gentlemen, had to sort of, because this was just it wasn't a real state then. It was just they just had the territorial government here, which was a little scarce in terms of laws and whatnot. That they sort of. And did some they were the enforcers, were they not? Some of them?
You had to enforce your own laws on your property, and so you would get together with everybody, and you'd all agree, here's what we're going to do, and we agree that you have this piece of property, and we'll defend you and your right to this property if somebody tries to jump your claim.
And you'll defend mine.
And you'll defend mine, yeah. And his brother George, one of his favorite stories was talking about the claim clubs and the claim jumpers and how they took care of some of the claim jumpers. And of course the most famous one is Callahan, the Irishman who got dunked in the river 3 times before he decided that, through the ice, by
yes,
the way.
a very cold river.
A very cold river, to decide that, maybe I will give up my claim on this property and you can really have it back.
This was in the very early years. This was in almost the pre-territorial years, when there simply was no real law enforcement available, and there were instances like Don's describing where things had to be resolved. There were no courts or anything like it. So the claim clubs did serve that purpose, but after a while they were done away with.
And the surveyors had not come through to survey the property, so your property was described as being 3 paces left of the elm tree, 50 paces to a rock and turn, and it was just really a necessity that they do that until the surveyors would come through and say, okay, you now own this particular spot.
Some of the people whose names are on streets in this town, he knew them personally.
Yes, isn't that wonderful?
I mean, and he describes them so like I feel if I had a picture of these people, and many pictures of these people have survived, like the Creighton and that, and I were to look at that, and I were to close my eyes or read this, I could see what was happening.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, these were his friends. These were the
Yes.
people he talked to every day. He went out every day with a notebook and a pencil, and he interviewed people. He was, in a way, he was kind of a reporter, and he was just gathering information for that weekly letter home.
Right.
And so he would talk to Kellum, he would talk to Hanscom, he would talk to Poppleton, and these are names that we see today.
Yeah.
He would talk to the Kuntzes. Yeah.
Yes, he would.
What were some of your favorite things? I alluded to earlier that he sort of had an opinion of Americans in the beginning.
Oh, Joseph, you know, Don and I and Del and Bob.
We
like
should
to
mention
say-
their full names.
Yes, all right, Del
Weber.
Weber, who is the the Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Bob Marks, who's retired Vice President of Accounting for Mutual of Omaha, are the two people who make up the four of us.
The crazy quartet.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, we get along.
You went
very
a
well.
little crazy when you were doing
We
it.
did.
But we have all gotten to know Joseph Barker Jr. almost as well as members of our own family, because we have spent all of these hours with him, and we have spent so much intense concentration trying to understand exactly what he's saying.
It's almost like he was sitting there with you when you were debating.
Well, we do have a picture of him in the room with us. And yeah, I'm sure he's sitting there going, I got you again, didn't I? And yeah, we just had so much fun with Joseph and his letters. He has a girlfriend. Even though he's single, he has a girlfriend.
Now, is a girlfriend here or back there?
Here.
here, but the folks back there are also trying to arrange
Right.
a connection with Miss Ridley.
Yes. We don't know what Miss
never
Ridley's
learned
first
what
name
her
was.
first name was.
But he's a little reluctant to write to her without ever coming back to talk to her face to face first.
Yeah. He's bashful. He's kind of a shy guy.
Yeah.
This was almost, you know, maybe I'm reading too much in, but since you have read so much, this was a way for him to, you know, having to go out and talk to these people, send this information back, almost was, I'm guessing, and I'm getting kind of crazy here, you know, inspiration for him to do it. He might not have, you
It
know.
brought him out of his room.
Yeah.
Yes,
It
it
brought
did.
him, he roomed with the Kellums. He had a wonderful room that he retired to in the evening. He had his own table, he had his own lamp, he had his own rocking
Stove.
chair and his stove, and then he would write the letters. But then in the day he would go out and he would talk to these people, and he would find out about the retail business. He would find out about the railroad. The railroad was intensely important in 1866, 67, 68, because for one thing, the railroad management was trying to promote the possibility of starting the railroad from Bellevue. Now, it had been started from Omaha, but they thought, well, if we could just sort of frighten the people of Omaha into thinking we're going to start from Bellevue, maybe they would like to sweeten the pot just a little bit.
Oh,
and
politics
Bellevue
starts
would
in the
do the same
earliest
thing.
days,
So
doesn't
there
it?
was this
Where's the
wonderful-
bridge gonna
Yeah,
go?
that's
Where's
where's
the-
the bridge going to go?
Over the
becomes
river.
a theme of Joseph's, one of his many themes. And so that's one of the things he's talking about every day, is what is the latest rumor, you know, and what will back it up.
He really was a newspaper man at
Oh,
heart.
he
Yes,
was,
he was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
He writes home. He says, "I tell you good and bad, and you can make up your own decisions about what's going on. But I'm going to tell it like it is."
There's one wonderful quote where he talks about the railroad, which has finally decided where they're going to go. And he says, the railroad, which has been both our joy and our terror, is doing better now.
You worked for the railroad, Union Pacific Railroad, for years and years, which was the railroad that was coming through
of
in this,
course.
you know, transcontinental matchup out in Utah. You know, so you were you familiar with? When did you come be familiar with Joseph Barker? Did they know about Joseph Barker back in the days? 'Cause
I really had known a little bit about Joseph Barker, but the letters were not available in their completeness. So no, I didn't know everything about what he
But
said.
as you read them, and
Oh,
having
it
worked for
was-
the
it
railroad
was-
and knowing what you did
It was
anyway,
wonderful. Yes, it put real meat on the bones of what we knew about that whole escapade.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's ever written as much about the railroad in Omaha as Joseph has. And none of the books so far, of course, have even begun to mine Joseph and his commentary about the capital B bridge. Because every time he mentions the bridge, capital B bridge, you know exactly which bridge it is he's talking about.
This
where
is-
the capital
With the
B-
capital
where
B,
they-
just like when he's talking about building property or buildings downtown. He wants a capital B brick building because it's secure and isn't going to burn down. So he loves to capitalize for emphasis.
See, he wasn't a print man where you could boldface or italicize.
No, you couldn't.
His was a capital, whatever.
Capital B.
So, without giving everything away, which you couldn't even if you tried in the last few minutes that we have, snap out some of your favorite quotes from this man and what he thought of Americans and whatnot.
Don.
Go ahead.
Well,
I mean,
Joseph depends on
Fortunately,
how his day was.
if you're looking through the book, you can see in the back of the book there's something called The Best of Barker, which is purely subjective about our Joseph. He says, "I assure you, I shall come home as soon as I can. We can never like America except on compulsion."
In other words, you have to be forced to deal with.
You have to be forced to deal with these people. America is Americans. How does that line go? Americans are Americans after
Can
all.
only be Americans, but then later on he'll say the best of America lives in Omaha.
Lives in Omaha.
You could not find a finer group of people anywhere.
There are
Still
nice-
my sentiments today,
Yes.
but
Yeah, there are the people here are so much nicer than they were in Ohio.
Yes.
That if we had to make a living here and stay here, we could, but we really ought to go back to England because that's where we really belong. Then his girlfriend comes back to town and things cheer up a little bit, and
And the
typical
Barkers,
young man.
right, and the Barkers, without giving it away, are still here.
yes,
They're still here in Omaha.
yes.
By the way, just to give Douglas County Historical Society a little punch here, the Best of Barker can be seen on the internet. It's 8 pages in a PDF file on the website that you'll see throughout the show, or have seen, and so you can get a better sense, and it just whets your interest.
Yeah.
It just whets your interest.
That was our hope. Yeah.
That was
He,
That was our thought.
he says, I had to use my dictionary to figure out how to spell wife. Funny, is it not? And then he spells funny, F-U-N-N-E-Y.
and he spelled wife,
W-Y-H-Y-F-E.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just fun to read. What else intrigued you about as
I
you?
loved his description of the grasshoppers, because the grasshoppers were a serious threat.
Oh,
Not
yes.
only a real threat, but a threat from a public relations standpoint, because the more the newspapers wrote about the grasshopper plagues, the people in the East heard about them, the less likely they were to come out and buy land and settle land and live in Nebraska and so on. So he's just really afraid and appalled at the swarms of grasshoppers, and he has these wonderful descriptions of them as they come darkening the sky and clouding
All day.
Omaha.
And
As
his
long as it's warm.
descriptions, he is a very descriptive writer. I mean, I think, in the years I was trying to learn to write, and people were saying, when you do radio, which I do now for NET radio, you try to paint a picture. He painted pictures wonderfully.
Oh, he
Doesn't
did.
he?
Just,
Doesn't he?
just absolutely wonderfully. I mean, and no matter what you're in, if you like social history, he's painted a great picture of that. If you like military history, he's got a great picture of that. If you like mining and gold mining and all, what a great story of the miners coming down from Fort Benton.
Which is
in their-
something I didn't know anything
in their
about.
Mackinaws, which
than
I
here.
thought was a coat, but turns out to be a reinforced boat, so the Indians can't shoot through it with all their gold. They come down every winter, and Omaha is the commencement of civilization.
Right. And then when the miners get here in these reinforced boats, they disassemble the boats and sell the lumber, which I think is just wonderful.
Yeah.
Boy, oh, they were recycling even then.
Yeah.
You, before the show, were talking about the different nationalities that were here. Omaha was a melting pot way back then.
Definitely.
Way back then, I think everybody would be surprised to walk down the street in 1866 and hear the variety of languages and accents that you would hear back then. It just had to be amazing. I mean, with Joseph in his very proper English, he's coming down, and the Kunzes, who ran the First National Bank, were German, so I'm sure they had a fairly thick German accent because they emigrated directly
They
from
hadn't been
Germany.
here that long.
It wasn't like they'd been in the eastern United States for years. They emigrated directly from Germany. And
you
the
had
Patricks
the
and all the
Patricks who were
Irishmen.
Irish, and all the Irishmen who came out to work on the railroad.
Yes.
So this was, as Don says, this was a melting pot.
You always think of this as, the frontier kept moving west, but this really was the frontier.
This
at
was
that
a frontier
point.
town.
Yes,
No
it
question
was.
of it.
It really was.
And with all its kind of wild and crazy
Yes.
and tough
And it's
stuff.
being reported on by Joseph Barker Jr.
That's right. And you've got Mr. Kellum writing back in the beginning, Emma Davis and her Brownell Hall Jr. Well, Emma Davis was, as the city directory noted, was notorious. So
She was a notorious person.
a notorious
I
person.
was assuming we
And-
would use many more words now.
Yeah, we could, yes. And then Dr. Manel gets involved in a scandal with a teacher at Brownell. And
Oh,
he
so there
reports
is a-
that-
Oh, there's
Oh,
a
there's
hint.
scandal in
here
There's a
too.
hint of scandal all throughout the whole book.
So your imagination just runs wild. But you don't need a lot of imagination when you're reading this because it's wonderful. The thing that amazes me is that this may be a singular kind of collection.
We're not sure, Carol, but we don't believe there is another collection that even comes close to the completeness of this, not only in the sheer number of words and letters and pages and so on, but also in the completeness of the coverage, the political, social, economic history that is written.
This is an absolute slice through the whole fabric of Omaha life.
And if you're from Nebraska, I mean, in greater Nebraska, where this show does get out there, I mean, this is the beginning of Nebraska. I mean, you know, Lincoln that comes into the play, and does he,
Oh, yeah,
and
well,
he talks about that, does he not?
George,
does.
George sends him a letter and says, "Where's Lincoln? I can't find it on any of my maps."
Ain't there yet.
Lincoln
there
was
yet.
just barely there.
Yeah.
You know, and George's maps were a couple of years old. You had to get a new one every year or so.
Right, and Joseph made sure that he got a new one. But
he did.
all the supplies that went out to all the settlers went from Omaha. And all the freighting and all the wagon trains that went out to Denver for the gold fields went from Omaha.
And so it gives you a real idea. We all know the history. We know, you know, they came here and they went west and they did this. But this actually, you know, you can see all the movies that have been made about this, but you can actually visualize things that I've never visualized before. And I've seen a lot of movies and read a lot of books about the pioneers. And
He talks about the Army coming in after 3 years, the 1st Nebraska Cavalry coming in off the plains, and how dirty and filthy they are. And you're right. There isn't anything he writes about that your imagination can't make a visual picture of and say, "Oh yeah."
well, we've run out of time, but there's plenty of time I'm sure you have to read this book. Their Man in Omaha, the Barker Letters, Volume 1. And this is a terrifically wonderful book in the back. And I can't show the whole map. This is an Omaha City map from way back when. Big old thing.
1866.
Big old thing. So you really need to have that too, but you can refer to it. I want to thank you for being here. We've run out of
pleasure.
time. Don Snoddy, Barry Combs. Really, if you're going to buy a book, invest in a book that you want to keep in your family, it's this one. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Consider This.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.